The year is 2025, and Smash Ultimate is now a whopping 7 years old, with Sora releasing as the last character 4 years ago. If we're tracking milestones, it practically means Ultimate is a second grader now. If you followed Smash for a long time, you'll know that the gap between Brawl on the Wii and Smash 4 was about 6.5 years, putting us only 2.5 years away from the longest gap between Smash games, and that's only if you start the timer for when we got Sora. If you track the time starting at Ultimate's launch, you're looking at the longest gap by several months. The father of Smash, Masahiro Sakurai, is currently wrapping up the development of Kirby Air Riders, which means it's completely possible that the next Smash game will be in the planning stages in the next few months if it isn't already. Now, 2.5 years is a long time, but time seems to be going really fast these days, and I need something to yap about to distract myself from the world crumbling around me. But in all seriousness, Smash topics are my favorite type of discussion, and with Kirby Air Riders releasing so soon, I think now is an appropriate time to start thinking about the next game. I've been speculating on Smash for well over a decade now, and I've always wanted to create content on it. I feel like now is the perfect time to capitalize on my hyperfixating and unhealthy knowledge about the development and decision making in the series. That being said, the landscape this time around is extremely different, as the Ultimate era of Smash has been this culminating experience where we all got what we wanted, and there's not many characters that feel specifically missing. But now we're at the point where there's just no way a roster at this scale can be replicated again. The direction for the playable roster is usually just build on the last one, but now we've hit a peak I don't think we can come back from, which leaves us all asking, where do we go from here? This isn't the first time we've asked this question in regards to Smash. After Smash 4, a lot of people wondered what direction the series was going in, purely because DLC ripped the floodgates of third parties open. Now it feels like we're asking this question because there's just no way 86 characters will survive this next cycle. Ultimate is a vast game with a ton of representation from all over the industry. Outside of Fortnite, which is its own beast, Smash has become the most impressive gaming crossover by a mile. Its roster and stage selection are unmatched, but that's not to say that Ultimate isn't a flawed game. Outside of pitfalls like single-player content and questionable gameplay decisions, the game's movesets are extremely outdated. While there were many changes to characters from the last game, it just doesn't feel like enough. When you look at characters from Smash 4 and Ultimate and compare them to characters from Melee and 64, there is a clear difference in how well the characters are represented. You could make the defense that some of the most influential games came out too late for them to plan changes around them, but that just means there's an expectation for the next game to represent these newer appearances. There's just so much material between 2015 and now that there's just no way we won't see some degree of changes. Now, not everyone needs an absolute overhaul though. In fact, I'd say most characters only really need a moderate amount of changes to feel newer. So now we're looking at an 86 character roster with the expectation that about half will get some moveset updates. Even if you shaved a quarter of those characters off, you're still looking at a ton of work, especially since we're all expecting new characters on top of that. I also think the idea of a Switch 2 edition of Ultimate is a no-go. Enough time has passed that people have juiced the value out of Ultimate, and making a paid update without any major character changes will not sustain the community for another several years. While there is a lot of character and stage combinations to use, there is a level of staleness Ultimate is experiencing, and I don't think that could be fixed with an update when many of the issues lie baked into the game's engine. There is far more potential for a new game, and in 2 years, people will be more than ready for one. So, going back to the question of the hour, I think we've established that characters will need upgrades. Because of this, something has to give, whether it be the amount of new characters, the amount of characters they let stay, or even both. Personally, I would rather only get a few new characters if it meant majority stayed and got moveset changes. Smash Ultimate's roster does a really good job of covering all the bases, and I'd hate to see established characters go. It feels as if we have all the important first-party characters, and I'd rather keep the third-party ones that we have than exchange them for others. Plus, if mainstays get a handful of new moves, to me that feels like a new character and makes the experience feel like a more definitive Smash game. We do need to keep in mind that there does need to be at least some new characters, as Smash rides off the hype of revealing them. No matter the outcome, I imagine the game launching with a similar number of unique new characters to Ultimate and about 80% of the veterans returning, with the rest of them being drip-fed post-launch with a few more new ones sprinkled in. This would make for a good mix of hype coming from new movesets and new characters while still keeping a good amount of surprises after the game comes out. We also know each Smash game reuses a ton of assets from the last installment, so maybe models, textures, and animations can be brought over for all the existing content so they can focus on new moves and new characters only. In order to get a better idea of what direction the next roster will take, we should first figure out which are likely to get cut. As far as who's getting the axe, I think there are some obvious choices, but the slimmer you make the roster, the harder these decisions are. We also aren't working with a specific quota here, since we don't really know what the target number of characters are going to be next time around. For this reason, I've created a hierarchy system to visualize which characters fit what conditions. Before we get into it, I want to preface this by saying none of this is gospel or my definitive prediction, and will probably change over time in the series. I plan to make a real prediction video in the future, so don't flame me too hard yet. At the bottom, we have the safest bets, those that I think will survive no matter what direction Smash goes in. This lineup has a lot of playstyle diversity and representation, including obvious Nintendo face characters, retro characters, and Smash staples. Overall, these 42 characters are Smash at its barest minimum, and if the roster were to be made in its simplest form, this is where I think it would stand. The next tier is filled with characters important to their own series and characters with movesets that should be preserved. These are characters I could see going if the cuts are going really deep, however, I think a lot of people, myself included, would greatly miss many of them. Both of these categories contain characters that are either very unique or would feel missing if they were gone. I think a lot of these are still pretty safe for the next game as well, and you could reasonably put them in the tier below, but there is a small degree of uncertainty to me. This puts us at 49 characters total, pushing us past the halfway point of existing veterans, 26 selectable characters behind Ultimate at launch, and 37 behind Ultimate's final roster count. The third tier includes third-party characters likely to stay. The fate of third-party characters are up in the air, but if we are expecting that pool to be cut down, these are the ones that I think would stick around. Of course, that is if they come back at all. It's hard to say for sure with the ones that debuted in Ultimate, but these 6 are all fan favorites or genuinely iconic inclusions, and I think these would be the ones to stay around for the long run. I also feel you staring at Richter and wondering where Simon is, and I just think that after Richter's inclusion, he's been popularized more than Simon has globally. Plus, it would be really cool if Alucard got in and the Symphony of the Night duo were both playable. For Tier 4, the first category is clones with the highest moveset potential, being Young Link and Dark Samus. These two are a special case where both have appearances to pull from and their original character is likely to undergo changes. Young Link has a lot of potential to include a stance system with a few different masks, for example, along with the fact that Link would receive further changes to be more in line with the recent era of Zelda games. Young Link staying would secure the legacy of the Green Tunic Classic Link, while also satisfying some sort of Majora's Mask representation in a playable fighter. For Dark Samus, I am fully expecting her to maintain the floatier feel she has after Samus receives an overhaul based on Dread and Prime 4. There are also a handful of things that could change with Dark Samus, like attacks from her assist trophy and boss fight to make her feel like her own character, or at least a very distinct semi-clone on the level of Falco and Roy. Before moving on to the next tier, there are 3 characters I'd like to highlight. I'd say these 3 characters are in like a weird danger zone category where they could be reasonably cut or justifiably stay, each for their own reasons. Ice Climbers are an extremely unique character and a Smash staple. However, their complex moveset design, unpopularity, and reliance on an AI not killing itself make it hard to defend their place on the roster. It kind of feels like most people want Ice Climbers to stay for the sake of them being in the game as a novelty rather than to actually play them. We are discussing a hypothetical game where movesets will get redesigned, so I think if they receive some sort of revision, they would be fine to stay. Wii Fit Trainer is in a similar boat where she is an unpopular pick with an awkward feeling playstyle, but her moveset is nothing like what's in the game. She does have a novelty pick aspect to her, but also has mechanics like buffing herself and spawning an item that she can launch with her own attacks, and I think that makes her special. You also can't deny the importance of Wii Fit in Nintendo's catalog, So as long as they make tweaks for her to be more palatable for players, I think she'll stick around. Lastly, we have Corrin. Corrin. Now, Corrin is a special case. She just had a recent appearance in Fire Emblem Engage and actually has a very unique feeling moveset by being a shape-shifting dragon with a chainsaw and having one of the coolest specials in the game in the form of Pin. The issue with Corrin now is that she's never been a popular character. She has a high play rate, but more than anything, she's just a vessel for a cool moveset, which breaks my heart because I do like Corrin a lot. I think that she has a place on the roster as she is the most surprisingly relevant character of these three and is fairly unique. Even though she herself is not a likable character, she remains to be one whose kit can't really be replicated or put on someone else. With this tier, we would stand at 68 characters, and I gotta be honest, I think this would be the perfect cutoff. This means that there are 18 characters that wouldn't make the cut, which I think is a fine trade for some new movesets and making room for new characters. Moving on to tier 5, we have our batch of most likely to be cut first parties and our remaining third party characters. Starting with the third parties, Ken, Sephiroth, Kazuya, and Sora. For Ken and Sephiroth, these two characters are the second character from the series that they rep, and with how uncertain third parties already are, I think these are out. For Kazuya, I think this character just doesn't work in a Smash setting. He's awkward to control, and a character like him requires you to play the game in a different way that doesn't make sense. This combined with how poorly implemented he is from a balance standpoint makes him a contender for the axe. Lastly, with Sora, this character feels like a one and done opportunity for the fans. Sora was already an awkward pick due to how watered down his inclusion was without any Disney stuff, and for a grand finale, he kind of felt forgettable. Something about him feels weird in the sense that his inclusion kind of feels lifeless compared to some others, and I'm gonna be honest, his kit is really bland. He could be a great contender for a spruced up moveset, but I think him being left behind is a reasonable take. Moving on, I know a lot of people will be upset with these first party cuts, but the reality is all of these characters have something holding them back. Piranha Plant feels like fluff in a series that has a ton of more deserving characters, and Lucario has been phased out for other characters in both Smash and Pokemon. Lucas is one of those that could stay, as we've kept semi-clones like Wolf and Isabelle in the stronger tiers. However, Earthbound's relevance and Lucas's general unpopularity makes him a contender to be cut. When I think of what makes a Smash character worth keeping around, I think of relevance, uniqueness, and popularity, and I gotta be honest, Lucas has none of those. Lastly, you'll notice that I put the Miis here, and the reason is I think this new Smash game will just focus more on the characters, and Miis have already been perfectly executed in Ultimate. Cutting them could also allow a lot of Mii moves to find their way into other characters' movesets. Overall, I think the Miis are just one example of what will be left behind as a reason to go and revisit Ultimate. This does take a lot of potential DLC options away since Mii costumes were a bulk of what we got post-launch, but like I said, I think this game should focus on the characters, and maybe that would open the door to DLC costumes for characters rather than Mii fighters. In the last tier, we have Dr. Mario, Pichu, Toon Link, and the remaining Echo Fighters for all the reasons you were probably already thinking. Many of these guys can just be skins, and the ones that can't, like Toon Link and Pichu, I don't really feel like they need to be around. Of course, I would love these characters to stick around and get revitalized movesets, however, we need to make room for new characters, and I just don't think that these guys are going to make the cut. This hierarchy is the best way I can visualize the level of likeliness each character has to stay going forward. So, all that being said, I present to you a couple of options for the direction the roster could go in. The first route they could take is trimming the fattiest of the fat and only adding a small batch of new characters, focusing completely on existing character changes. This would include characters from the first, second, third, and fourth tier of my hierarchy, leaving behind tier 5 and 6. This is what I see as the safest route to take, and I do believe that this one will be the case. Sakurai knows that cutting characters makes fans upset, so this outcome satisfies a bulk of the fans without cutting too many. The second option is taking the gameplay into a different direction by cutting the roster down even more and making assist trophies a new subset of characters that could be equipped as a special input. Basically, a new button and meter system will be dedicated to summoning your assist trophy, which will make them come out and do an attack special to them. This would allow more characters to be in some way playable without needing to be fully developed. Skull Kid may not be able to be a character, but he could be a summon. They may not be able to bring both Ness and Lucas back, but if Ness could summon Lucas to do PK freeze, it would be a pretty cool compromise. Aside from the representation benefits, this would make for a fun game where you can cover your character's weaknesses with a summon. Bayonetta is known for being weak at killing and maintaining stage control, so being able to cover her weakness with an assist that offers a strong kill option or projectile would be beneficial to the player. This would essentially reinvent the way we pick characters in Smash. Not only that, but would offer a different type of game than Ultimate. For this concept, I'd probably limit the roster to the first 3 tiers in the hierarchy, with the remainder being contenders for assist trophies. I would also go as far as saying that some of the characters in tier 2 and 3 could also be great candidates for a supporting role instead. I would really be okay with either of these outcomes. The great thing about Smash is that just because a new game comes out, it doesn't mean the old one disappears. Of course, the ideal outcome is that no one gets cut and we get new movesets and new characters, but we can't have it all, and I'm sure no one would really miss Pichu anyway. Now, I do want to present you with a third possible route. It could be that Sakurai wants to completely hit the reset button, leaving us with the lowest tier in my hierarchy of 42 characters. If this were the case, I'm kind of mixed on if I would be fine with it or not. I would expect every character to be redesigned from the ground up, pretty much reimagining movesets to the point where a character's kit is majority new stuff. I think I would be okay with it. In fact, I'd probably prefer it if we got more veterans down the line. 42 completely unique characters is nothing to scoff at, and with more care being put into the engine over trying to hit 60 plus characters, this would leave the door open for the game to become a platform and have lasting support and a thriving competitive scene. The way I see it, a game with a lot of characters but a flawed engine is hard to fix, but a game with a pristine and well thought out mechanic system can always be built upon with new characters. With a series like Smash, there are so many different ways you could take it, especially now that we're at a crossroads of the series' future. No matter what happens, I have faith that the next game will do the series justice, even if some characters don't make it back. So, what do you all think? Feel free to continue the discussion in the comments, as I'd love to hear all of your great points or how mad you are that I think Lucas is getting cut over Corrin. I want to keep doing these types of Smash videos and build an entire concept through this series, so stay tuned and I'll see you next time.